although speaking in the toto, speaking in the general, we could say that collectively speaking, the purpose of civilization, one way to describe it would be to affect man's feelings. And if you recall the way I one time would do the nervous system in man, and these colors show up or what, and I had used my own description of parts of the nervous system cut up into different circuits, and I was calling it the red circuit of just being all of man's physiological motor operations, and then I was calling it the blue circuit. Is that showing up, or does anybody know? And that would be what ordinary people would call human emotions, which I'm going to let it slide for the time being. Well, everyone assumes, and I even use the description of a different kind of circuitry. I guess out in the scientific community, at city level, they'd still be referring to it as man's higher animal passions. It's like the limbic system, I guess, in the brain itself, be comparable to what they would call it. It would seem to be the area that they want to say is exclusive to man. Sympathy, pity, charity, romantic love, religious sentiments, and etc. I repeat, I'll let it slide for the moment. But it is without a doubt, from any view, given that if we accept for the sake of discussion and call them human emotions, the blue circuit, that it is some sort of bridge. And then we've got, I don't have a yellow marker, I used to call it the yellow circuit, is everything up here, the cerebral, the higher brain functions, consciousness itself. All right, from a collective view, its purpose is, and civilization collectively, of course, is up here. That's the only place, speaking collectively, that civilization exists. Up here, its purpose is to affect feeling. It's to affect the total man, but it's primarily to affect feeling, because civilization, it's easy to affect the body part. We're not even going to worry about that. But that civilization, in fact, you could say that change the tense of the word, the civilizing effect of civilization is to what? Is to civilize emotions. Is to turn man from being a selfish, self-serving creature with just the kind of animalistic sentiments that would make him grab food from his own kid's mouth if he was hungry, to go from that to, in fact, being charitable and sharing his food with a complete stranger. That you could say that is the purpose, or one of the purposes of civilization, is to affect feeling. But now let's take it to a personal level, an individual level, and put it this way. What is the purpose of human speech? And human speech being operationally synonymous with intellectual activity. But what is the purpose of human speech? And those same sorts of people that would have put up with my first description would then begin to fall into what would seem to them to be the obvious replies of, well, it's to convey information, it's to, after they hit a few things, I submit to you, they would finally get around that the purpose of speech is the improvement, to affect human consciousness itself. That the purpose of thought is to affect and improve thought. What is education, after all? It is an intellectual process to do what? To improve the intellectual process of those who partake thereof. May I further suggest to you hockey pucks? That is, may I suggest to you a much better point blank, in your face, non-operative response. The purpose of human speech is to affect feeling. It is not to affect thought. There is also, in an open-end or an apparently closed-end reality, there is no such thing as exclusivity. And so I can say that there are exceptions to that, and they're not individual exceptions. It's just that within the whole spectrum of what the purpose that talk is serving, it is a potpourri. It is not pure water, it's salt water. And part of the salt would be that there is indeed the need at the collective civilized level to convey information such as technology, inventions, the improvement of technology, which, though, if I get around to it, I'll show still is an attempt to affect feeling. It's what technology is. They can say it's an attempt, such as to come up with the electronic nail driver, the wheelbarrow. It's an attempt to save one's physical exertion. It's labor saving in the physical sense. A nitwit could come up with that. No offense to any of you nitwits out there that may have a PhD in sociology or anthropology, and it took you 12 years to come up with that. A nitwit. But what is labor-saving devices? Since I said if I get around to it, I'll get around to it now, and then we won't have to worry about whether I get around to it. What are labor-saving devices? Again, if you're an ordinary person, you could say, well, and fall into what I was about to do a small parody thereof, you could say, well, it is to free man. It is to give him more time to be civilized. It is to give him more time to be with his family, to write epic poetry, to fall in love, to invent new stuff. And that all sounds good, and nitwits before you have come up with that. But it's still, if you carry it just a little bit further to the point blank right up against the wall, it is still all of that. Labor-saving devices are to what? To affect feeling. And I don't mean physical feeling, not to save your back, not to save the arm muscles of driving nails, although it does that. There's something beyond that. The purpose of talk is to affect feeling. This, I suggest you, has immediate, non-ending practical use if you realize it for yourself. For one thing, it then answers all inquiries, all criticisms that you may have about very important cosmic and theological matters, such as why the proliferation of talk shows on television? Why does everybody now feel obliged to spill their guts? Why is it important? Why do women, or men, they got their own version, insist, well, tell me you love me? Why do parents say, listen to their kids, you say you love me, or by God, I'll knock the shit out of you. I'm your father. You don't talk to me that way. Tell me you love me. People go, what is going on here? I just explained it. It also answers all of the apparent conundrums. It erases all of the irony of human speech, which is the source of all irony. In case you never thought about it, there is no such thing in the world of behavior as irony. Now, an ordinary mind will say, yes, there is. No, there's not. You've got to be able to talk about it, to say, well, by God, that's erotic. You've got to have had a verbal expectation, and this didn't meet it. That's the only way it become ironic. All of the, I don't see why to go into many more examples, but all of the apparent paradoxes, ironies, questions, puzzles of human existence. Now we're talking about above the survival level. We're not considering dying's a great puzzle. I mean, there's no puzzle. You're born, you die. I mean, some of the people very hard up for some interest in life that think this is a supreme puzzle. I don't know why I'm taking time out to address nitwits, but the only questions in life are above. They're up in the yellow circuit. Well, for a second, we'll assume that they touch, because if I'd drawn the yellow circuit here, my spatial description, the yellow circuit would be up here, coming from there, but it would have overlap down in here to the emotions of man, into the limbic system in the brain itself. I mean, it's all stuck together. unless you have been subject to a very unusual head trauma, and then, or else you have had someone who's been listening to this show who did try and perform a kind of psychic surgery on you with a ball peen hammer and a upholstery screwdriver. All of the questions of life, all the way from theological to philosophical to human behavior to romantic, everything, every question that man has about the human existence comes from one place, and that's speech. And only nitwits, be they educated or not, can fail to see that. Because all you've got to ask yourself at any time, which is so point blank that it's like me saying, hey, and everybody understands it. Okay. Anytime you doubt the validity of human speech, its importance in any particular area, and I just gave you an area that covered everything. I said all of the singularity of human existence. But you can pick out specifics. Since I made that blanket statement, you can go inside and pick out little small blankets or quilts therein, or little small comforters. And they're obviously subject to my same all-encompassing statement that if you doubt that anything, religion, is absolutely speech-based, all you've got to do is ask yourself this. Now, of course, I assume there are no nitwits watching, because all I do is piss you off, and we don't need that. All you got to do is say, all right, if there's any doubt that religion is absolutely speech-based, all you got to do is think real quickly. If we couldn't talk, would anybody be religious? And of course, all the nitwits, like a silent cue, like Balanchine did, get within their shorts and just grabbed everybody, and everybody goes, dun, 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 dun. I mean, nobody's going to hear that. Pick out any other subject you want. And then pick out all of civilization, which I am using to represent the singularity of human existence. It is operationally synonymous with speech. It just simply is. Therefore, all of the questions, all of the so-called problems, be they cosmic, philosophical, social, political, economic, whatever the hell it is, it's talk. And if you see that, I got to admit, if you're an ordinary person, which I'm playing with reality, and you saw that, it's like somebody, you've been waiting all your life, if you're just an average, intellectually, at the ordinary level, just an intellectually active person, you know, if you suddenly saw this, it'd be like you have waited all your life. You don't like to really think about it and pin it down, but it's like you're waiting that Christmas or your birthday, since everybody's not Christian, thank God. It's like you're waiting for the holiday, New Year, or your birthday. And it's like you don't know when it'll come, but it's like it's the only thing that keeps you alive, like it'll get here. And if you actually saw that, it'd be like somebody, some smart ass jumped out from behind a door, some stranger, and just opened all your presents and showed them to you. I mean, it's ruined the whole thing. So therefore, nitwits will never see, people still waiting on the holiday can never see this, because there would be nothing left. It would be like the supreme shooting of the ultimate duck. The duck about cover. I mean, so much so that probably Ibsen's head would come out of the grave and go, Jesus, it's worse than I thought. That kind of thing. I mean, who wants all the questions answered to the point? It's ordinary people, if we could do this, which you can't, but if you could, ordinary people, if I could do that to them, go, everything's been bothering you? And I'll go, And of course, everybody go, can I tell you? And I go, no, skip all that shit. I know what it is. Trust me a second. Would you guys like for me to tell you, the whole world, all the sane people, all the ordinary middle-class people with good jobs and haircuts, all you people, all the stuff that bothers you in life, and they go, you want me to answer it and tell you what it is? And they go, all right. And I told them. Yeah. Believe me, I would not get any award, no handshakes. As soon as I told them, as soon as I could make everybody suddenly realize, it wouldn't take but a second, I just told them, and they'd go, in essence, what they'd say is there's 5 billion people minus a few of you, as they walked away from me in blatant, abject disgust, their attitude, their swagger would tell me, thanks a lot. And they'd go off over the horizon, 5 billion people with their kind of heads hung down, As a matter of fact, there wouldn't be much of a swagger left. I shouldn't have put swagger. It'd be more like a, well, what the hell are we going to do now? But for the rest of you, they can stand it. There's no way to look at it. Once you see it, it's like every day's a holiday. Or else you know there is no holiday coming, or pick out your own allegory. It doesn't cost any more. I'll talk, but I was going to pick out some of the specific ones. Human relations. Religion would seem to be about as metaphysical as you could get, but now you people should see it. That all of the ideas of higher sources, and man in some way can understand where he came from, an ordinary man, a religious person. All of that is nothing but talk. That's all. It's not an attack, but it's nothing but talk. All you got to do is say, well, there's got to be some exception to that, so ask yourself again, if I took away talk, if man could not talk, would we be religious? And the answer, there's nothing to think about. You don't have to ponder. That's why I said you have to look off, because it's not a question. It's not even a rhetorical question. I just put it in the form of a question. If you saw that, just ask yourself, if we couldn't talk, would we be religious? It doesn't take a split second. I shouldn't even pause. There's nothing to think about. From that apparent transcendental end of the human rainbow experience, down to a more personal one. What is it that people continually, I was using a little dramatic sarcasm talking about the apparent, in spite of what they say is now scientific proof to the contrary, it seems to be spontaneous generation, that if you throw enough garbage, that is resistors and capacitors and tubes, over in a box, it no longer turns out rats, as they used to believe. It turns out talk shows. Everybody they're down to the point now, I guess, that these talk shows they're just having to say, they don't. For a while, I was told that all these talk shows were, saying at the end of programs or in the middle was saying, all right, everybody who's ever had their mother steal their third husband's something, anybody that's ever had incest with 20 members of your family, be sure and call. We'd like to have you on. But I understand now it's down to the point that it just says, call, give us an idea, because they've had My little joke was this. I'm trying to get down to a personal level, because it's certainly not an attack on talk shows. Why is it that if you listen, if you get past the point, if you understand that you can get past the point about worrying about technology and trying to find an exception to what I'm saying, that is, wait, human speech does have important ramifications, because Nobel Prize winners in physics and chemistry, they have to talk. Building a new car, being able to produce something important, like a real CD that you can record and re-record, it takes human speech. I know. Beyond all that, which is a small percentage, it's no more than the salt in the sea water. What's the rest of human speech about? I can talk around it. Feelings. You're right, I almost played the first bar of feelings. If it was ordinary people answering this, they would probably first want to say something like human relations, which is good enough. All the way from romantic conversation and the apparent arguments that spring therefrom between lovers, to affairs between family members, to affairs within a culture, within a religion. But it is still on the basis of feelings, of human emotion. Now, that's the way it would appear. We're disregarding how it's tied to the older emotions, to the emotions that we do have in common with wolves and sharks and attorneys and advertising men. Why do people talk about feeling? Why do people talk about sex? And I'm not talking about pornography and anything that's worthwhile to go spend a couple of bucks. But to stand around and talk about, well, you hadn't told me you loved me in 2 weeks. Well, yes, I did. Yes, but you used to say, I love you, honey, and the last time you said it, you just said, I love you. And if you were outside the window, just like some of you just did, you could laugh and go, well, how ridiculous. Yeah. Right. But then the point is, if a person ever has little passing moments of lucidity, abnormal lucidity, they even ask themselves, or they will ask humanity, acting as a social critic and not looking at themselves, they will say, what is yon hole afoot that we keep writing plays, poetry, movies, novels, and it is just based, or just it is full of people talking about the same stuff over and over. It's the human relationships. What are we trying to prove, or why do we keep doing it? We keep flying up the same ground. It's not getting anywhere. What's the point of people staying around saying, I love you, I love you. I hate you, I hate you. What's the point? Now, this is not widespread, but I'm just trying to get you to consider that it does pop out. It even pops out in psychology. That it is still, it's nothing new. Psychology didn't invent the idea, but to use fairly contemporary examples of it, as Western psychology is fairly adamant across the board of the importance of talking about your feelings. That not only is it beneficial, it can be detrimental to one's mental health not to. Don't hold it in. Talk it out. But then if you are a fairly literate, observant, just ordinary social critic, you could absolutely fall back into what I was just covering and saying, if you weren't involved, or if you forgot you were, if you ever were, and you could say, God, that's ridiculous. Somebody goes to a stranger, a psychiatrist, or a marriage counselor, and they sit around and bitch and whine. They've been bitching and whining like that at their house. Let's say it's a married couple. They've been doing that for how many years? And the couple admits 20. Well, now what? So now you're going to pay somebody X amount of dollars an hour, a stranger, with a haircut and a real job, and diplomas on the wall, and you're going to pay this person X amount of hours to sit there and go, while you bitch and whine, just like you've always done. What's the point? That's easy enough to do. And in fact, sometimes as a whole, the profession of psychiatry, in anomalous moments of lucidity, somebody within their ranks will point out, you realize there's not one shred of statistical evidence worth noting that shows that analysis does any good? And of course, then the profession, like everybody else, has to go, no. Of course, that's falling into the real foolish snare of thinking that any aspect of human existence has an achievable end other than suicide. Well, which anything that does, anything that does achieve an end was suicidal. Let's make it more blunt. What's the point? What's the point in a person talking about their feelings? What's the point in you, let's say that you're having a love affair with somebody. What's the point of continually apologizing, continually saying, well, wait a minute, let's talk about what happened last night. Or let me try and tell you the way I feel about so-and-so. Now, without making fun of it, I'm asking you, because if you've got any wits above the net level, then you would have to face up to this. I'm just going to go ahead and speak for you. If I said, in your life, what has that accomplished? The answer is, insofar that the aim was to have better relationships with specific people, with the opposite sex in general. What has it achieved? The answer is, statistically, nothing worth noting. Just like what has analysis done in psychiatry. It is simply a fact. Now, I can't prove it. I wouldn't even try to prove it. You either understand that or not. And you can say, well, it hadn't proved anything. So why do people do it? Why do people talk about feelings? Why do people go to counseling? Why do people, and not just professional, why do people counsel their children? Why do people give other people advice? People have given you advice. You've given other people advice. I won't ask for a show of hands, but some of you probably fell into it today, that you turn around to a stranger, or worse, or better yet, whichever, maybe somebody you know, and say, God, you ought to quit smoking. God, that's horrible. Don't you understand that you're killing yourself? Or you could quit drinking. Won't you give up, God, eating all those fatty foods? First, now, I know from an ordinary level you'd say, well, that shows your concern for so-and-so. I thought some of you just gave me that kind of look. You try to give me a secret signal that you portend, or you pretend, to having some wits above the level. What good does that do? Have you ever stopped anybody from doing anything by giving good advice? But I'm talking about, by God, good advice. Like, quit drinking, quit taking those drugs, you little, grab some little nephew or your son or daughter and say, don't do that. Listen to a word of wisdom. I've been through that. You don't stop there, do you? No, nobody does. I'm not just whistling through my hat, son. Of course, then the son goes, what the hell does whistling through your hat mean? It's not old druggy talk. It's old American colloquial and Anglo-Saxon talk. At any rate, the talk shows, if you want to use that as an example, get off here on one side foot, are replete again with people, the whole discussions, and they bring in counselors or an expert of trying to show the difficulty in communication between generations, between parents and their children, over whatever the hell they're up to now, or down to the way they dress, the way they act, the music they like, taking dope, not taking dope. The point is, have you ever turned to anybody and given advice? But now I'm talking about from an ordinary view, good advice, like give up drugs. We have to say that's good advice, or they'll take they wouldn't even show the. You just say, well, that's good advice. Have you ever told anybody that, friend or stranger, family member, friend or stranger, that they, due to your advice, of you insisting and maybe doing a good gesture like, by God, you shouldn't take dope. Believe me, I went through that when I was younger. And I saw the wisdom of my ways. That is, your genes ran down and all that shit. And now you think, boy, I wised up. Don't take drugs. Quit smoking. Don't eat all that saturated fat. It'll kill you. And the person goes, well, and they've been subject to the same barrage of civilized influence as you have. They've heard it all. And you say, you shouldn't be eating those greasy hamburgers. Imagine what it's doing to your heart. Did you see that thing last night on TV? And the guy goes, yeah. They had color cartoons showing fat globules, rushing through your bloodstream directly from a Big Mac and grabbing your heart, going, your heart going. And so you say, I'm only telling you this because I love you. Give up though. And the person goes, oh, you're right. Have you ever, has your advice, and I'm just picking, by God, that is good, current 1994, reasonable advice, cuts across all color, racial, religious lines, give up fatty foods, or cut down. Oh, by God. Have you ever given anybody that advice, and it had any effect on them? And the answer is no. If you believe otherwise, go over there and sit in the knit section with the rest of the people of your ilk wits. Nah. Now you might see them 30 years later when they're winding down and about to die, and they may, let's assume now they quit smoking, they're vegetarian, and you go, well, I'm glad to see you came to your senses. And they may even, you say, you remember one time I told you, I'm glad I had some effect. And they go, well, that is nice. Nah, have you ever turned to anybody, a child, your own son, daughter, friend, mother, say, you shouldn't do so-and-so? And they go, God almighty, you're correct. And stop it? No! If you believe otherwise, you shouldn't, you can't even sit with the nitwits. Back behind them. Because then the question is, well, have you ever done it to you? So I had to save that, because if you were ordinary people, which I keep playing like to make some of the points that we have ordinary people listening to this, is many people go, wait a minute, wait, don't move off that so fast. I have given advice. Or people's given me advice, which would be the same thing. Because I was going to ask you, has anybody ever given you advice that you went, oh my God, Jesus, God, I appreciate you telling me that. I knew I should give up this, fat or taking dope, but I don't know. It took somebody like you to turn to me and say, by God, you should quit, smoking or drinking. And it took that, and I realized, you're right. Has that ever happened? No. If it ever happened, it would be like your mother, or you see an uncle or somebody, and you hadn't seen them in years, and they say, well, I noticed you're not smoking anymore. And you go, no, I gave it up. Well, you gave it up because you started spitting up blood, and they took out a lung, and you just won't admit it. Yeah. With drinking, whatever it was. And you go, well, yes, I did so-and-so. I'm assuming that you're not that stupid, but people would want to say, wait a minute, advice does work. If advice worked, it would work on the spot. Don't tell me that, well, I went to church a long time, and my particular church taught that we should not have extramarital sex. And I got news for you. I wouldn't, my wedding night, I cheated on my wife, you don't know the truth. And since then, I hadn't kept a real chart, but I figure I've taken, I've had an affair, at least a one-night stand with like 50 women a year for the last 20 years. In my church, I knew I felt bad about it. But at least I finally stopped it. I realized my wife and my children out there grown mean more to... Oh, it is, the man's now impotent. He can't even get it up. And now, now the advice, that is, of actually being able to convey information that had a direct effect, would be immediate. Would it not? We hadn't changed the subject, remember. All talk is to affect feeling. But here's the point. It doesn't work. Not in a lifetime, which a lifetime is, we're always talking about the individual level. At the collective level, speaking of civilization, man collectively, it does work. Gradual, as it's supposed to. Where the hell's life going? You don't know. Life's in no hurry. Well, as far as you can tell from an individual level, if you're running by your ordinary brain, you're running by a watch. The time of which you should see just has absolutely it's just meaningless to life. It's meaningless to if you want to look at it scientifically even. Known scientific views, cosmologically or subpartically, submolecularly, our time is it's non-existent. You can't even put it together. It makes no sense. So collectively, it is having an effect. But it is meaningless to an individual man's life. That we talk for one reason. If you're ordinary, you talk for one reason. You don't plan it. You got no control over it. You didn't decide to do it. And it takes an extraordinary effort to even see it and then get away from it. But you talk for one reason. In general. And that is to affect feeling. That's what you're talking about. You do it even when you don't mean to do it. You do it when you are just... If you're a man or a woman, working in your own sexual connotations. But if you walk up to somebody and you're trying to find directions, you got your car in a strange city and there's 3 women. If you're a man, and they're staying over here at a hot dog counter, and you, for some reason, you walk up to one that appeals to you most and say, do you know where 3rd Street is? Except right when you walk up, you go, pardon me. I'm just pointing out this is the way life is. And you can say, well, I actually need to go to 3rd Street. It's important. I needed factual information. All right, I grant you that. But you picked out. You couldn't help it. You walked over to the woman that was your type. Your genes made you walk over there. And on the way, you sucked in your gut and you just went, pardon me. Do you know where 3rd? And you didn't have time to pick her up or anything. Right? The point is, speech is irrevocably tied to the attempt to affect feeling. That other than the variations which are of no particular, they do not enter into trying to do this. That's why I dismiss them as unimportant exceptions. Is everything you say is an attempt to affect feeling. And it does not work. That is, it will not achieve its purpose now in your life. Which is not supposed to, and be suicidal, etc. But it's not supposed to. But then notice that opens up, like where we started, all of the inquiries, all the doubts, all the questions, all the social criticism of man and his many institutions as to what's all this palaver about? Why do we constantly do this, and especially over things that we've been through it over and over? Not just theoretically, but a man will turn to his wife, or vice versa, or to his child and say, how many times I got to tell you, you're not going to stay in my house and smoke dope? We go through this over and over. Or a woman says, how many times, you're not going to stay out every Friday night. Tell me you're going bowling where the hell you go, and then come in here Saturday morning And I know what you're doing. How many times do we have to do this? I don't know how many times they've done it. 20 years. And you can say, well, boy, how ridiculous. No. You can say, well, something's wrong. They should break up. Well, maybe they should. Maybe they shouldn't. Who cares? Well, maybe they should get counseling. Maybe they should. Who cares? You have got to talk about feeling, even if you apparently are talking about something else. Because what talk is, it's a civilizing effect, which is where I started out saying in general we could say that the purpose of talk is to civilize. Because, and I assume all of you knew what I was saying, but jump back for a second to make it real crude. I can make a kind of sociological or historical or pseudo-anthropological statement and say, well, talk was very necessary in the civilizing of man, because one of the first ones is it's where men could talk about aggression, physical aggression now, territorial hostility, sexual hostility, that a man, instead of just, he sees another guy's, grabbed the woman that he was sleeping with last night in the cave. Now another guy grabbed her. He goes over and picks up a rock and hits the guy and kills him. That is not conducive to neighborhood peace. It's not. We'll never get around to having time to invent the electric starter or a blender. So part of talk at the minimal was for a caveman to finally say, "Hey, dude. Let go of her." And no one go, "You talking to me? Hey, you got 5 seconds. If I had a watch, you got 5 seconds, and I'm going to lay this brick beside your head." And so maybe the guy goes, "Well, all right, if you put it that way," and he leaves. We saved a human life, which is not important either, but it was like laying the foundation for civil behavior that you could talk about. But this, we're down really back to. It would really be the intellectual, the yellow circuit tied more directly to the red one. But at any rate, we're now talking about basic human survival, which, without any doubt, can lead to aggression. If you don't, if you have any doubt about that, ask a wildebeest about his social intercourse with the local leopard in the neighborhood. The wildebeest would probably want to say, "Yeah, I keep wishing we could, maybe sit down and talk it out." They're going to sit down and talk it out, all right. The leopard's going to talk it out like pick parts of the wildebeest out of his teeth, which is what men would be doing, still doing at that level, were it not for talk. That we can talk about the kind of aggression, the kind of animalistic aggressions and feelings that would rent us asunder. Let's see a wildebeest say that. That would tear apart even the slimmest possibility of there being civilization born. But jump from that now. That would be an easy one. I'm sure somebody out in the ordinary world has already said that somewhere along the way about the kinds of theories about what brought about civilization, or what was necessary for man to become civilized. He had to quit being a wanderer, and he had to be able to store grains. He had to start growing grains in one spot. He had to domesticate animals so that he could calm down and quit having to stay on the move. They can say that. And somebody, I bet, is finally said, and he also had to learn to talk. Because it wouldn't be much of a strain for an ordinary mind to come up with that. But that's collectively. What men cannot see is that individually, now forget the needs of society. We're talking about you and one other person, let's say. You and your mother, your father, your son, daughter, husband, wife, lover, that you continually talk. And think about the talk. If right now you ask yourself, well, when I talk, if we're not just sitting around just kind of babbling, which is a kind of social foreplay, if we're not just sitting around talking about this and that, if we're actually talking in a, quote, serious way, what are we talking about? It's always about feelings. Now, you can say it's behavior, but it's feelings. You're telling your son, listen, you've got to give up dope. You're 16 years old, you're going to fry your brain and all that, and it's going to run your life. And you can say, well, I'm talking about behavior. No, you're talking about feeling. Why do you care if you fry his brain? Well, I care. Well, what do you mean you care? I mean, he's doing it at home. He's never been arrested, so you don't have to go bail him out. Well, hell, I love him. He's my son. Feeling. That's it. So all talk that amounts to anything is a continual attempt for the individuals to affect Anybody would like to consult Mr. Johnson. It's both effect and, well, no, I don't want to go in. Trying to show off. I mean, I almost got my GED now, and I was trying to. At any rate, it's an attempt to affect feeling. A person could say, well, I'm saying this to my son for his own good. Ah, come on. I know that's true with ordinary people. But you're saying for what reason? Why do you care? Well, I do care. Well, why? I mean, what do you mean you care? Well, he's my son. Yeah, we know that, but, why are you saying this? Is him smoking dope, is it ruining your health? Well, no. Is him smoking dope ruining the house? No. Is it running down the trade-in value you're going to get on that old Volvo of yours? No. Well, why the hell do you care? The thing is, well, I'm a father. Whether they get around to saying this is why I went through it. He said, well, I love my son. Or I tell my husband, my lover, I tell him, don't keep coming in later. Don't speak so sarcastically to me because you're going to ruin our relationship. And I can say, well, why the hell do you care? Well, I'm part of it. Well, yeah, but why do you care? The point is, they feel something. They can call it, well, that's love. It's family responsibility. I must. The talk is not about getting somebody to quit smoking dope. It's about my feelings. I don't like you doing that. But if you couldn't talk, what would that come to? Starts with a Z. It also starts with an N. It starts with an N twice. N in English and N in Spanish. Nothing. Quick, abrupt, but nonetheless, segue. If you recall last time, I was mentioning the fact that the kinds of point-blank reality that we talk about around here are such that men must make them sound distant and foreign, exotic, so as to be able to better dismiss them. And I was using religion as a great one. That somebody points out something about life somewhere along the line. And it hangs around. It's remembered for a while, and it sort of becomes, the words fall into some kind of semi-common currency. And finally, nobody sits around and plots it. It's not a conspiracy, but those that seem to find interest in what was said, this kind of verbal telling of life, some local description, it's as though on a secret signal, just almost overnight, somebody decides the gods told us this. Now that guy didn't just say that. How could he? And everybody around, go, oh yeah, you're right. God damn. Glad you thought of that. He'd go, well, did any of us ever think about it? And I'll go, no. Were all of us as well educated as him? Yeah, probably. It could have been better. Had he been around more? No. Did he have any access to better mushrooms or dope to smoke than we did? No. Well, how the hell did he come up with that? That's kind of off-putting, to say the least. Like, I used to know the guy. He used to babysit with my wildebeest in the backyard when we'd go out of town. And then just one day he turned around and he went, blah, 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 blah. He almost knocked us down. And I'll go, yeah, I remember that. But then somebody says, it was obviously the gods, the spirit, something got into him to do that. And everybody goes, that was it. Oh, then you feel better because then you can dismiss it. I wanted to point out, although I was noted again for that religion I was using its widest possible application of being civilization itself, and then consider speech again of what talk is doing. Up until at least recent times, and I know in theory in parts of the world they still think it is, religion played such an important part. History still says it did. Consider human speech and consider the dismissal of people of something that was said that was a statement, an unacceptably point-blank statement reflecting reality, describing reality at the time, and then they must later, if it's going to have any survival, or as we say in Hollywood or Broadway, if it's going to have any legs, it must be dismissed. It must be placed foreign. It must be made distant. The easy one being the gods. All the way from Greek mythology, when you find the beginnings of civilization east and west. The first writings seem to be important. You go into China, go into the Far East, you go into the Mediterranean and European civilization. The early writings, the earliest, are always something fairly important, such as recipe for beer. No, never mind. I made the joke too early. You do know the writings they find, the earliest writings everywhere on this planet, every culture, the earliest writings have to do with what appears to be religious affairs. It is not, the first writings are not things like, the basketball scores from, the Sumerian culture if they had it. It's not gossip. It's not erotic tales. The first writings are always one thing. Apparently religious, transcendental, mystical, take your point, but things about the nature, the origins of man, the purpose of life. That was the first things they wrote down. First things they were talking about thinking about enough to write down. So, we can say that is, in its widest possible sense, religion. Of how important that was. And keep in mind, though, I'm pointing out one of the important uses of it has never been recognized, and that was to be able to take the information and separate from it. It's to distance yourself from it. Like, I don't have to do that. It's like saying, all right, the purpose of all Western religion is to treat your fellow man as yourself. And let's say that every civilized person on this planet, whatever creed or religion, has to go, yes. But then, everybody looks around, everybody knows by now that you can't really do it. It's simply a goal. It's what we aspire to. The word sounds simple enough. The words don't say aspire to it. All religions have got somewhere that a God or a prophet says, treat everybody like you'd treat yourself. Treat strangers as your best friend. It doesn't say try, it says do it. But then you turn around, that's point blank. I'm not saying it has any validity or any use, but everybody on the planet says it does, or they'll give lip service to it. But if you insisted, now if I called out to humanity, wait a minute, we got 6,000 or 7,000 years here of all you people parroting this over and over, and nobody does it. Look ashamed. And they all think, we're not going to look ashamed. And I could say, well, why not? And they say, all right, watch this. And they'd think, I would really fell off the truck. And they'd go out, and they'd turn to their head priest or rabbi or shaman and go, can we do that? Tell that man, do I attend church or temple faithfully? Do I pay my money? And the guy go, yeah. All right. So I should be able to do as well as anybody. Or you work for the big guy. Can you do it? And the priest would go, well, no. No, we're all human. In other words, we distance ourselves from that. It's what we aspire to, or that to which we aspire. Yeah. That's real nice, because now you've distanced yourself. Back to what I was going to throw in, those some ointments in the fly. Or however that goes. That's acceptable, although humans, ordinary minds, do not look at it that way. They find it acceptable that unusual statements, supreme statements, astounding statements, transcendental statements of reality, of human life, they can take verbally as long as it's at a distance. That is, certainly none of us can treat our fellow man like ourselves. No. That's already been established, right, Father? And the priest says, certainly. So there it is, the head guy says, no, I can't even do it. Would anyone like to consider the minuscule difference between that, using ordinary man's descriptions, which I hadn't played with, they would describe, in general, they would accept my descriptions of religion, etc. Consider I'm saying minuscule since we've got to say something. Distinction between a man saying, between someone representing, someone interpreting a previous statement of reality that was too point blank, and they now attribute it to God. They attribute it to a spokesman in the past, some prophet, some inspired person. That may be true about we should treat our fellow man as ourselves. But, that is not right here today. That is not an immediate possibility for me. This is a kind of truly transcendental notion, aspiration, reality, of which we are not absolutely a part. We're simply mortals, and maybe we'll get there someday, and etc. The minuscule distinction between that would be their kind of description. They would accept that. Between that and also what they would describe as insanity. Assuming, again, all you people can not fall into the silly snare of taking this as a criticism. But if religion was not accepted verbally as being something else, it would be what? I mean, if religion, suddenly we could take the whole operation, all the literature, all of the beliefs, all the statements ever made about religion. Now listen, I know it can't happen, but it could. And we suddenly snatch away the word religion. But the same operation, everything's still there, and we've got to call it something, or it'd be a black hole that would suck us all in, our brains. So it's all there, a large part of the human history thus far, and we'd say, well, we've got to call it something. You know, quick, what can we call it? They've taken away the word religion. How about insanity? It fits perfectly. People hear voices. We got people walking on the street now, sleeping under viaducts and cardboard boxes, crawling down in mailboxes, and then when you go by, they go, "This is God talking." People standing around street corners going, and it scares the hell out of you. People, you know, get away. Well, you know it. And especially if a guy's standing out there in rags, and he's saying, and somebody says, and maybe a cop finally says, "Who are you talking to? I've seen you standing here." And he goes, "Well, I talk to God. He tells me to meet him on this corner every day." Is somebody going to believe that? They're going to put him away. What's the difference between that and the Pope, a rabbi? You know what the difference is? Speech. We call it something else. Now, I know it's got a history, and you can say, well, institutionally, and it has this and this validity. It's talk. You can distance yourself from an insane person easily. I don't mean physically distance yourself, but you can just... A man shows up, you're staying at the corner, and a man comes up to you dressed in an army blanket and a towel around his head, and he says, "God told me that he's going to destroy New York within a week, and he told me to come tell you." If you're an ordinary person, good sane person, perhaps even an Episcopalian, a decent person with a haircut and a job, is that going to upset you? No. No. Why? Well, the guy's obviously insane. And then we pick it up later that week, end of that week, in church, at temple, somewhere. And here's a man listening to a priest, a rabbi, someone discussing. And it could be nowadays a politician discussing, or a sociologist discussing human behavior and how we should act. It's insanity. Yeah, but we call it something else. Back to the easy one. Well, assuming that still that you understand it's not a criticism of religion. What is the difference between, like the Pope, just picking him as the most important, well-known figure in the world, the religious world, and he stands there and he tells you in several languages, an erudite, intelligent man with the world's largest following, now that Papa Joe's gone. And he tells you, he issues a new decree having to do with the life of the followers, or he says the life of the planet. It's just that everybody's not quite up to speed yet and realizing they need to be Catholic. But he tells you what God told him. And people swoon. People, you know, the camera swings around, you see this beatific look on people's face. And what's the difference between that and this guy that comes up in an army blanket next to you up there on 42nd Street and says, "God's going to destroy New York. He told me so." You know, get the hell away. What's the difference? Well, the difference is you can distance yourself from the Pope, from religion, and it's an acceptable difference. Plus, we call it something else. But what can be more insane? What can be more insane if you looked at it from a absolutely psychiatric view than the most serious, important, well-established, historically based institution of man, to wit religion? What can you look at as being insanity? It's full of people saying, "Well, God told me to do so-and-so." Or last night I fell into some kind of funk, a trance, and angels, cosmic spirits, whisk me. And it goes into this great, Miltonese kind of, God forbid, rhapsodizing on being, flown through here and there and shown all these aspects of human life. The nut wards are full of people like that. But now, not just religion, and not just nutcases. Well, let's stay with the nutcase, but not just religion. What is all talk? Now, an ordinary person can say, well, if I follow where you're getting, or what you're headed for, then you're going to say that some talk's insane. Close. But then they'd say, oh, wait a minute. Now, I say, yeah, that's what I thought you were going to do. But wait a minute. There's only some kinds insane. Now, I'll admit that, says the person. I'll admit that, such as your example, the guy comes up in army blankets on 42nd Street and tells you God's going to destroy New York. All right, now that kind of talk is insane. There's no doubt. But that's an anomaly. What is the difference between, from their view, talk that is insane and talk that's not? I'm going to cut it off at the end of the tape. You don't have to sweat it. It's a good time to cut it since there is no end. What is the difference? It's whatever is already adjudicated to be, whatever has been called. Because if you see, all talk is nuts. If you don't believe it, just look around you now. Who writes that down to go, wait a minute, all talk is nuts. See, the nitwit section is movable. Regardless of what Hemingway thought, it wasn't just, a buffet. It's the nitwit section. You can take it with you wherever you go. The only difference between insane ideas, which is insane talk, and those that are not, is the talk that's already established, which is which. And so you got no way out. You ask those who, by their own definition, collectively, are sane, and you go, is all talk insane? I heard that. And the same person will say, well, no. And they'll say, some is. Look over there, that kind of stuff is. But all talk's not. Are you crazy? Everybody that believes that, go ahead and hold up your hoof and go, moo.